Resource Management Module 1. In this module, we are going to be looking at the complexity of managing family resources. In our Unit 1, the chapters covered are 1, 2, and 3. So for this module, Module 1, we're going to look at Chapter 1. Some of the objectives in Chapter 1 are looking at what does a family and household look like when we relate it back to resource management. How do we define these things? How do historical, environmental, and cultural influences on a family impact their decision-making, their ability to interact within their communities? And then we'll look at some disciplines and other perspectives that apply to the family. So I think it's important for us to go ahead and define what family resource management is. It is the understanding of the decisions individuals and families make about developing and allocating resources, including time, money, material assets, energy, friends, neighbors, and space in order to meet their goals. So when I show you these two pictures, is this what you think of when you hear the word family? You may not even know who these people are, but many years ago, these are what we saw as traditional families on TV. If I showed you these things, does this resonate more with you for your family? I know for me, my family is large and loud, and we are all blended together. My parents have a very much his, hers, and our situation, as do many of my siblings. I have 3 way older brothers, and they all come to the table with wives and ex-wives and children and adopted children, and we just have this huge dynamic, and we're loud, and I love it. So I want you to think about, what does family look like to society, to you, to the people that you may be working with in the future? So this is really where we start defining what family is. Families provide stability most of the time, but they are constantly in a state of transition. The structure of a family is going to look very different for you than it did for me potentially, or from your neighbor if we were sitting in class. The structures could be traditional, non-traditional. It could look like cohabitation. And so really dive into what these things look like in your text. So when I ask you about resources are really identified as anything that we use to meet an existing or future need. So for me, a resource definitely is gas. I don't even want to look at the price that we're paying now for gas right now, but that gets me to and from work. Money helps me buy that. And so for my family, money and gasoline are 2 big resources that we utilize. So what do you think of when you hear the word resources? What about how families use resources? So we're going to talk about Abraham Maslow later in the semester, but families use basic resources such as food, water, shelter, clothing. And if you're familiar with Abraham Maslow, you're going to know that that is the very basic bottom level of his pyramid that we'll see. So some key resource management concepts are going to be the interdependency of individuals, the dynamic environment that they're in, and then the conscious effort that's being made to meet the needs of all. And something to keep in mind, that family resource management is a process. So how do we figure out and identify resources? Identification is guided by culture, availability, and accessibility. So availability, meaning the ability to be used as needed. Accessibility, the ability to obtain something when it's needed. So there are some examples on page 6, but when we kind of dig a little bit more into this, if there is a large pool of resources, there is a higher probability the need will be met with efficiency and effectiveness. So what do I mean by efficiency? Really looking at and meaning that being or involving this immediate need, like it's there, it's being met. When it comes to money, we often see money being substituted for time in resource selection. Okay, so think about, how does money get substituted for time? How do we buy things that save us time? So quickly looking at decision making. There are several types of decision making that you're going to cover through this module. The first one is going to be rational decision making. The second one is bureaucratic decision making. And then there's one more that we'll look at in the next slide. But in rational decision making, we are searching for alternatives, we're looking at consequences, and then we're really taking the action that maximizes those desired objectives. Okay? Bureaucratic model of decision making, we really look at this for low risk decisions. So grocery shopping for staple items is an easy example for the bureaucratic model. Think about families and how they would benefit when decisions will have long-lasting impact on the family unit, at really looking at these rational decision-making modes. Okay, the third one is going to be the political model. The outcomes that are related to the power of individuals within the group is what we see during this. There's oftentimes bargaining and compromising, but in one family unit, they may use a variety of styles of decision making depending on the decision that's being made. So we're going to look at what we call the 5-step decision making process, and you're going to have a chance to do this yourself. So number 1, recognize the existing need. Number 2, identify alternatives to fulfill those needs. Evaluate the identified alternatives, select and implement, and then reflect and evaluate. We oftentimes neglect that number 5 because we don't like to reflect and evaluate things, especially if we make the wrong decision. So that piece is really crucial and important, though, so that we can, what you may have heard before, learn from your mistakes, right? So individuals and families use basic decision-making steps for even small situations. So think about your most recent eating out experience, okay? Think about, how did you get to that decision? How did you decide that's what you were going to do, that's where you were going to go? Oftentimes we let kind of those alternatives, well, we can do A or B, and then we have someone else select and pick, okay? So that's a little quick rundown. I want you to definitely read more in your text about decision making and the styles and the process, but I want to show you a little bit more about how cultural and other influences can really impact family resource management. So families have changed as history has evolved. Obviously, we know that. Early Greek and Roman culture left a wealth of information that we can look at in philosophies and writings. When we think about politics and religion, we can look at the history of how those particular topics in family resource management have been expressed through those avenues. When it comes to even like the Industrial Revolution, looking at how men and women are in a varying role in the household. Think about immigration, unsanitary water and food sources, working conditions. All of these pieces of history definitely have influenced what we see in family resource management. So if you're not familiar, I do want to highlight that last piece here. Lake Placid conferences are where the creation of home economics, or what we now call family and consumer sciences, really happened. Think about environmental and other cultural influences. There is on page 12 to 14 5 distinct orientations that exist within any particular culture group that I want you to kind of go over and look at. I'm not going to cover those in detail on this video. But when I say cultural influences, culture can mean a lot of things. But really looking at this from the perspective of learned beliefs and values and behaviors, typically because of how you were raised or how you were brought up and influenced. That's what we're talking about there. So this is that worldview framework that I want you to go over, that all cultures differ distinctly on these 5 dimensions. It's human nature, human and nature, time, activity, and then also looking at how do we differentiate this between cultures. Okay. So take a look on page 16 after you've reviewed those others that I just mentioned, and look at family A and look at family B as they determine their selection for housing. I've got it on the slide here if you don't have your book yet. This way you'll be able to go through and review that actually. But looking at family A on the left-hand column and family B with those orientations. So humans and nature, time, activity, and then possible decisions that will help them meet their needs as a family. So then go through, this looks a little bit blurry on my screen, the image does, but then on page 17, you're going to have the opportunity to go through and evaluate your own personal combination of the 5 dimensions. And it's got some perspective and prompting questions for you to evaluate and think about. So kind of coming to the end here, family studies is multidisciplinary. All of those pieces of history play a role into family resource management. But when we look at families, we can't study them in their silos. We have to look at multiple disciplines such as sociology, psychology, economics, biology, anthropology. All of these things help us get that holistic view of what family resource management is and are really important for us to study and understand family behavior. Obviously, right now, families are in a very interesting point in history. We've just come through COVID. It feels like it's just been this really weird time and blur. We're establishing new processes and routines, and things are changing even in the workplace, which directly influences family resource management as well. So a lot of disciplines, that's why we're calling it multidisciplinary study families. So just some things for you to think about as we wrap up this video. Other than money, how many resources can you identify that would be important in the management of families? That's one thing I want you to think about. Individuals and families use basic decision-making steps even for those small things, like we said, going out to eat. Think about another time where you may have used this process. I've given you a worksheet if you want to practice. If you click on this in your slides, this is going to take you to a worksheet where you can work through. Maybe you have to decide if you're going to go to grad school or apply for a job following your degree. That's a big decision, not a small one. Maybe you have something that's less pressing that you have to make a decision on. But I want you, if you choose to, go through and practice that decision-making process. And then the last thing that I would like for you to think about is the reality check on page 10, When Uncle Sam Calls. It's really a good, impactful story for you to kind of tie back into this first module. So I know this is quick and furious and fast, but there are lots of opportunities for you to define family and household, looking at the circumstances that influence families, looking at decision-making models that apply to families and really learning about those. Also looking at the disciplines and perspectives that help us study families. So this is Module 1. If you have any questions, please reach out and let me know. Thank you.